All right, let's see some of the characteristics of the Cisco public cloud. Right. So we already mentioned that we are operating the service on when this is something that gets delivered as a Cisco Cloud delivered service. We are using the public cloud backend. In our particular case, we're using AWS and Microsoft Azure as a cloud backend. Right. So there's obviously all the characteristics of those public clouds are in place, right? There's some of the highlights that are important for our SD-WAN service delivery, right? So there's a couple of attributes in here. So obviously the availability of it. So for some of our customers, actually for quite a few of our customers, the geographic distribution of that control infrastructure, and again, if you recall, just like we talked about in a previous slide, we're again talking about the delivery of those control elements, right? So when we talk about the delivery, what gets instantiated in this cloud is again the vBond, the vManage, and the vSmart elements, right? The three control and management plane elements of the solution. So again, that's what we're drilling into, is to say what are the characteristics of the Cisco public cloud in order to deliver those key SD-WAN control and management elements. So the availability in multiple places, 6 continents, is important because we have geographically distributed and geographically dispersed customers, right? So is there a necessity, if you are a distributed customer, is there a necessity to go and deploy your control infrastructure closer to where your actual sites are? No, there is no necessity like that. But it's a comfort to some degree that customers feel that if they have this control, for example, the vSmart controllers, if those are servicing a specific geography or they have a presence in a specific geography, it's better to have those vSmarts co-located in that geography. So we have different deployment models of how we can distribute the vSmarts. They're all active. They can be instantiated in different places in the world. We have control mechanisms to make sure that certain sites will only connect to certain vSmarts. So we have in the product lots of flexibility in that degree. But the availability of this service, of this hosting service in all of the continents is something that comes quite often, right? And we can basically operate out of any location that public cloud provider operates, which is the AWS or Microsoft Azure. Right. We have our tool set, and again, I mentioned that the Cisco Cloud delivered option is really where we see vast majority of our customers gravitate to. So we have an extensive tool set that would allow an automated instantiation of those cloud control and management elements. So everything is fully automated, and the instantiation can be done by either a cloud ops team or just the sales teams that are sort of onboarding the service for the customer, right? So simplicity and scalability. Now the environment itself is, I mentioned it earlier, single tenant or multi-tenant, right? So some of our customers, they would say they are comfortable with residing on a multi-tenant solution. Some of our customers are a little bit reluctant to be onboarded into a multi-tenant solution. So we offer both to our customers. We say if a customer wants a dedicated system of their own, which means a complete dedicated set of controllers that only they have access to, and only they are the ones that those control elements are controlling, then we have that option. And this is a single tenant. And again, we're going to touch on that in the later part of the presentation. For customers who are okay with a multi-tenant, these are the customers who are maybe on not such a high scale, a little bit lower scale. They're okay with multi-tenant solution. They don't care. We provide isolation between the tenants, role-based access control within the tenant. So there's lots of sort of controls within the environment to have the multi-tenant option as a feasible option, right? So some customers opt for that, right? Now we mentioned the onboarding is done really fast, whether it's 30 minutes or 25 minutes. We can debate about that, but it is fast and it's fully automated, right? So we have that tool set that is in our disposal. And now the uptime is extremely important. We have a high uptime for the backend infrastructure. We are not going to go into the details in this particular session, but even in case that the control infrastructure goes down completely, there is still survivability of the system itself. So when the system is running and then there is this catastrophic event that the entire cloud disappears, right? The system does not go down. Obviously, certain functions are not acting as they used to, but the system continues to operate in a last known good state. So when we claim this high uptime, that uptime is only for the availability of the backend itself. The availability of the actual service could actually be 100%. Because I may be, even if my cloud disappears and I still continue to operate my environment fully as I used to do before, then my uptime is 100%. Nothing really impacts the service. Right? We have an integrated built-in disaster recovery with recovery time objective and recovery point objective of 1 day, where we basically back up the data, particularly in the vManage system, which holds the statistics. So we back up this data as far as statistics and configuration is concerned, and we can recover in case something really happens and vManage is sort of gone to the degree that it needs to be recovered. Security and compliance is also very important. We have controlled access into this environment. We use some of the mechanisms available in the public cloud environment itself, as far as safeguarding who is allowed to connect. For example, things like IP filtering and things like that, if you're familiar with AWS security groups in AWS. So those are in our disposal. Inside the product itself, we also have controls for role-based access control to segregate duties of administrators. Not only is the access into those control and management elements protected by the cloud providers themselves, but also the elements themselves from inside, particularly vManage, is protected through role-based access control. For others, we have also support for AAA with radius and access authentication. So every single element of the solution is fully capable of enforcing this segregated access. Right? From security standpoint, there's the SOC 2 compliance, which is really just make sure or states that we are very highly compliant from security standpoint. Again, these are the characteristics of the backend cloud infrastructure.
David, when we host these control components on Cisco public cloud, how do we make sure that they are isolated, and is there any data sharing across customers or to Cisco?
Sure. Yes. We don't have a lot of real estate on this slide to do some annotation, but yes. So the data that specifically things that have to do with statistics, things that have to do with performance of how my underlying transports are performing. All of the data is collected on the routers themselves, right? So the edge routers are the ones responsible for collecting this data. They're the ones who know the performance of the connected circuits. They're the ones who know the performance of applications. All the statistics of the system, they're collected on those edge appliances. That data is exported out into the vManage system. Now, if the vManage system resides in the Cisco public cloud, obviously that data gets exported. Now, in the vManage itself, it's stored within the database structures. Right? Whether you're running as a single tenant or as a multi-tenant environment, that data is segregated on a per tenant basis. So obviously, if it's a multi-tenant, then that data is only within the tenant. If it's a single tenant deployment, then you don't have anybody else sharing this vManage. So the data is yours. It is stored on the vManage in the database structures of the vManage itself. So to some degree, yes, there's an export of this data that is statistical data that is relevant for the SD-WAN operation from the edge devices, which are on-premise at the customer location, into the vManage, which is a cloud-hosted, in our case, a cloud-hosted system. So that's where so there is an export of that information, right? And be that a single tenant or multi-tenant, it's pretty much the same. It goes into the database structures, and there's a database structure that holds the statistical database. It's isolated, as I mentioned, in a multi-tenant system, only goes into that tenant. In a single tenant system, the whole system is dedicated to the tenant, so obviously there's no sharing.
So it is just our management and statistical data. It is none of the actual customer data.
Absolutely, yes. It's a very good point. So all of that is a control plane operation, right? The actual data that goes across the fabric, so to speak, is going site to site. So it's going edge to edge. Those can be two branches, two data centers, branch and data center. That traffic is basically an IPsec encrypted traffic. there's a choice of doing GRE, which means it's not encrypted, but whatever the case may be, encrypted or unencrypted, it goes across the tunnel connection between the two edge devices and never touches the cloud. So from that standpoint, the statistics about the SD-WAN operation is exported out into the vManage, yet the actual application data stays strictly within the two edge nodes that communicate the data.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. So let's move a little bit forward here. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the details. All of that was around the Cisco cloud, public cloud backend, right? So let's drill a little bit deeper into the three options that we talked about in the beginning. The Cisco cloud delivered, the partner delivered, and the on-prem delivered at the customer data center themselves, right? So as I mentioned earlier, we have either the Cisco Cloud Ops team or the Cisco Field. So one of the two, right? Basically starts the chain of provisioning. Obviously, there's a process that goes before that, which is the whole ordering process and things like that. But let's assume that we're past that. So customer has already been sort of as opted for the service, and now it's the provisioning cycle of the service, right? So this deployment into the Cisco cloud is fully automated. As I mentioned, it's as a service, right? So when we talked about that, we have an extensive automation that is behind that. So that's really where it takes place. Is that the Cloud Ops team or the Cisco Field is using what you can think about this SD-WAN orchestration or SD-WAN orchestrator tool. We call this internally vOrchestrator, but in essence, it is an SD-WAN orchestration tool that is leveraged by the Cloud Ops team or the Cisco Field in order to start this chain of deploying the control elements. And again, when we talk about the control elements, I'll repeat here as well, we're again talking about the vBond, the vSmart, and the vManage. Those are the things that basically go into this cloud. And that is where that deployment happens, and that's where the orchestration happens, right? So it is delivered as a service, which means when customer wants an Cisco SD-WAN service, after they've gone through the sales process, the deployment, none of this stuff, actually none of these things that are depicted here are within the customer environment. All of that is completely in the cloud. And that's what we mean a cloud delivered. So it's delivered as a service, right? And it's, as we mentioned, it's a Cisco public cloud infrastructure, which is AWS or Microsoft Azure. And it has this global presence characteristics. As we mentioned, 6 continents, we can instantiate those things. And again, the instantiation is something that's built in within this SD-WAN orchestration tool. So a Cloud Ops or a Cisco Field can actually choose what is the location that they would want to instantiate those things. Right? So it's really all automated. We build this fully automated backend in order to make sure that we can onboard customers into the Cisco SD-WAN services as quickly as possible. Now, because this is hosted within this cloud, which is Cisco Cloud, and this is delivered as a service, we, and more particular Cloud Ops team, takes the full responsibility for making sure that the infrastructure is healthy and scalable to the degree that is required by the customer, right? So it's a very important element that really ties back to delivered as a service. So customers who are looking to have Cisco SD-WAN as something that they consume as a service, they may not want to spend cycles to actually go and start sort of deploying things in the traditional way that things have been done on a box-by-box basis. They want this to be delivered as a service, and what they want to focus on, the operational elements. They don't want to focus on the orchestration and instantiation piece. They just want to focus on the usability of it. I now want to go and start deploying my edge routers, right? So if I want to go and deploy my edge routers, those will be talking to my control infrastructure. That's what I want to focus on because that's where my business is, right? This is my business wants connectivity and all the value-added stuff from the SD-WAN, right? The transport independence, the added security, the ability to deliver better service to applications. All of these things, they're all good and they're all properties of the fabric itself. So the fabric itself is what the business really needs. Business does not need to be in the business of deploying the control infrastructure. And that's exactly the key differentiator of why we deliver this as a service, and that's why a vast majority of our customers opt for that option. Is because focus on things that you want your business to be interested in, which is the fabric, the edges, the actual fabric itself. Right? And we take care of the rest. So our cloud ops team makes sure the infrastructure is healthy. We have our monitoring that is done. We know which elements are healthy, which ones are not. We know which ones are experiencing issues. And from scalability standpoint, for some of our customers, scalability is important. So we make sure that we scale those instances to the numbers that those customers require. Obviously, there are scalability concerns. We haven't talked about them in this session, but there are certain scalability numbers around each one of them. What's the size of the instance I want to deploy? Things like that. So it's important, and our cloud operations team takes care of that. Now, beyond the instantiation, then comes the management and the usability element that I mentioned, right? So the management piece can be done by two entities, by two parties. The first one is the service can be self-managed. And when the service is self-managed, we're really talking about the IT staff of the customer. The IT staff of the customer is actually doing the management piece. So what does it mean in management? That means the interface with the system through the management tool, which is the vManage tool in here. And that's where the customer IT staff comes in, performs all the operational tasks that need to be performed against the system through the vManage. Many of our customers do that. Alternatively, some of our customers opt for a managed service. When they opt for a managed service, even though the infrastructure was delivered in Cisco Cloud, and it was delivered by our cloud ops team and by our field, and using our orchestration, partner can still come in and provide a management service for this infrastructure. Now, the management service depends on what kind of service the partner wants to offer. They can offer a service of manageability, which is basically just going into the vManage tool and providing configuration assistance for the SD-WAN elements. That's one. Second, they can be operating on the SD-WAN fabric side. They can be offering service of procuring physical circuits, making sure there is a physical connectivity, because at the end of the day, even though this is all cloud deployment, the actual physical circuits are still required in order for this communication to occur within the environment, right? So partners have multiple ways that they can provide value-added services in this managed service deployed scenario, right? In this case, the partner staff is responsible for doing that, right? And again, management or maybe something that has to do with fabric and procuring circuits and things like that, right? So really, the outline of what it takes to deliver this as a Cisco delivered service.
So David, from what I understand after listening to you, it seems like we suggest customers to deploy it on Cisco public cloud versus on-premises. Is that a right statement?
That is correct. We will have an option when we're going to look at the self-deployed, the on-prem deployed. You're correct, Sukrut. The idea of using the Cisco cloud basically allows the customer to leverage the goodies that we've built into this from the orchestration standpoint. So this entire process of delivering this as a service, making sure that the cloud is healthy and monitoring this, scaling this to the right degree, all of these are very important elements that a customer would be undertaking by themselves if they were to deploy this in their own data centers. So the recommendation is first, explore the option of Cisco delivered. And that's very likely that you're going to like what you see, and very likely you're going to be able to adopt it like that. In certain cases, compliance or whatnot, you may have to opt for the self-deployed on-prem solution.
So if I understand it correctly, hosting of these controllers is one-time effort, right? So in spite of that, why would you recommend me to deploy it on cloud versus on-premises? Is there any other added advantage?
Sure. Correct. It is a one-time effort to deploy those things. The effort may be significant to some of our customers because it requires a certain understanding of how the system operates, the guts of the system, the control plane of the system, and the interaction between those, right? That we kind of abstracted it with just the dotted line, but obviously there's a whole set of technologies that power those dotted lines, authenticated, encrypted, certificates. There's lots of things that come to deploying this piece, right? So it's true, it's a one-time effort. Sometimes even that is a little bit too much for some of our customers, right? But you're right. I mean, cloud, I think deploying this in a Cisco cloud is something that, as I mentioned, has, even though it's a one-time effort, it has a degree of making sure that the infrastructure is healthy. You took one effort to deploy that, but at the end of the day, who is going to monitor that and make sure that things are recovered when it fails? Or things like backup, right? Who is going to perform backup if vManage were to go down? Where's the statistical data stored? Things like that. So I agree with you. It is if this was only about just the instantiation piece, some customers may just swallow that. But many of our customers, they like this, and at the end, many customers also have the projects that would say, cloud first, cloud only, whatever we want to call them, right? It's basically moving away from an on-prem data centers into the cloud data centers. So that notion that a customer is maybe, or that motion that a customer is maybe going through, irrespective of SD-WAN, kind of plugs in very nicely into SD-WAN, because that's exactly what we're saying. If your business says get out of data centers, awesome. You're getting out of data centers for your WAN piece.
And in line with what you've just highlighted, do we offer SLAs? Because this is a critical component.
Absolutely, yes. So high availability, health monitoring, recovery, things like that. Absolutely, we have SLAs, just like you mentioned, Ali. There are SLAs behind them. So a customer, this is a key, this very critical piece of an infrastructure. Wide area network is really the bloodline of an enterprise connectivity. Right? So it's something really critical to the businesses. We want to make sure, and the customer themselves want to make sure that the deployed infrastructure is up to par to be able to deliver this service to them, right? So not to say that you cannot do this yourself, but if you can consume this as a service, many of the customers would actually opt for that rather than just take a more traditional sort of a self-deployed approach. But both are valid approaches. All right, any more questions? We're good? Good for now.